Hello and welcome to your last recording for semester one. That is right. This is your last recording you'll need to watch and complete the key phrase for in semester one. Woohoo! That's exciting. So we are also in week 17, and this is also the week of December 13th. And I do want to start with a warm problem that I do want you to complete in your math notebook so that when you go to do your assignments at Ingenuity, you've just got one more example to refer back to that'll help you when you complete this week's assignments. So the problem I have is x squared plus 6x plus 8. And I want you to solve that equation. So think about the ways that we learned that we can solve equations that have an x squared term in it last week, and see if you can apply one of those methods to solving this equation. So I'd like you to try this in your math notebook on your own, and then it's nice to try it on your own, and then you can check your work with mine in just a moment. So go ahead and click pause now and try to solve this problem. All right, so because we have an x squared term and a 6x term, so we've got an x squared term and an x term, we are going to solve this by factoring. So we're going to use factoring to solve this. And that's mostly because of this x term here. That's going to not allow us to use square roots to solve. So because we have this x term here, we're going to solve by factoring. So remember the trick I taught you guys where we want to find factors of our constant term, which is 8. So factors of our constant term 8 that add up to our middle term, which is 6. So we want to find two numbers that when we multiply them times each other, they give us 8. And then when we add those same two numbers together, they give us 6. So what are some factors of 8? 1 and 8. But does 1 plus 8 give us 6? It does not. So those are not the factors that we would use. What about 2 and 4? I know that 2 times 4 gives me 8. And then let's check the addition. 2 plus 4 also gives me 6. So those are going to be the two terms that I need. And let's go ahead and set it up in our factored form. So we would have x plus 2 because the 2 was positive, and x plus 4 because that 4 was positive. And now we're going to use the zero product to help us solve this equation all the way. So our first step in factoring is that we need to factor. Then we're going to take each of our set of parentheses and set each of those equal to 0. So we're going to have two equations set up. And then we're going to solve for both of our equations. So when you've got x plus 2 equals 0, to solve for x, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. And we get x equals negative 2. That's one of our answers. And then the other answer, we're going to subtract 4 from each side to solve for x. And we get x equals negative 4. So we've got two answers. X can be negative 2 or x can be negative 4. And if we plug in either of those values in for x into our original equation, they'll be equal to 0. I should have put equals 0 in that to begin with. I apologize for that. All right, so that is a good review of factoring from last week. I am going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause so that you can finish taking good notes. All right, so this week is the last week of assignments. It's not the last week, but it's the last, I guess I should say the last week of assignments, because I'm going to have the assignments take you all the way. This week's assignments are going to take you all the way to the end of the semester. So this week you are going to learn how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So we're going to learn about the quadratic formula. So one more method that we can use to solve for quadratic equations. And then that's really all the material you're going to learn in semester one. You're also going to take the the unit test on solving quadratic equations. I don't want to leave that out because you will need to complete that as well. And so that's really all the new material you're going to learn in semester 1. And then you're going to take the test, and then you're going to complete a semester 1 portfolio assignment as well to wrap up this semester. This last bullet is super duper important. The last day for submitting late work is December 19th. So I've posted about this before and sent you guys messages. And then one more reminder that the last day for submitting late work is Monday, December 19th. Now, the last day of the semester is December 21st. But again, the last day for redos and late work is December 19th because I need some time to get all those graded in addition to the current work. So just remember to please message me. You need to message me if you submit late work or redos to get it graded. If you do not, there's a good chance it's not going to get graded. So do that for yourself. Send a message so that you get your work graded so that I know to grade it for you. All right, so we've been talking a lot about quadratic equations and solving for them, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands what a quadratic equation is. So a quadratic equation is an equation that has a variable that's squared. Typically it's going to be an x, but it can be any variable. It could be a squared, it could be z squared. But to be a quadratic equation, we need to have a variable that's squared. We can't have any exponent that's higher than a 2. So it's got to be, the highest exponent is going to be a 2, and it has to include an exponent of 2. We could have a middle term like 2x, and we can also have a constant term. So that's an example. We might just have like an x squared and a constant term. That's okay too. That would be an example of a quadratic equation. We might just have the x squared and the middle term. That's okay too. That's still a quadratic equation. But if you look, all three of these examples, they have something in common. They all have an term that's squared. Nothing higher, so we can't have something like x to the 4th plus 2x squared. That would not be a quadratic equation. And remember, we can have a coefficient in front. It can be like 2x squared. So, solutions. We've been looking at how we can solve quadratic equations. But now let's talk about the number of solutions that we can have when we solve for quadratic equations. So sometimes we're going to solve a quadratic equation and we find that there's 2 real number solutions, just like in the example we did to start, the warm-up question. When we solved that, we found that our answer was x equals -2 and x equals -4, I think. So in that case, we had 2 real solutions. And when I say real, those are any whole number, any numbers. They can be negative or positive numbers. They can include decimals. They can include fractions. Those are real numbers. We might have a situation where there's only one real number solution when we solve for a quadratic. We might just have one x equals. And then there's also a possibility that we're not going to have any real number solutions. So that would be like if we were solving an equation and we got to a point where we had like x squared equals -5. And how would we solve for x squared here? We would have to take the square root of each side. Can we find a number times itself that would give us -5? It would have to be the exact same number times itself that would give us -5. Well, negative times the negative gives us a positive. So there's no solution here. This is an example of where we would have no real solutions. So these are the 3 possibilities of the number of solutions that we can have when we're solving quadratic equations. I'm going to go to the next slide. So we've got something called the discriminant in math, the discriminant. the discriminant can tell us how many solutions we should expect when we're solving a quadratic equation. That's pretty cool. So if we find the discriminant, we know how many solutions we can expect when we solve the quadratic equation. So how do we find the discriminant? So when you've got an equation, a quadratic equation, and it's written in this form, A would represent a number, a coefficient. So a number times x squared plus bx, so b would represent a number times x plus c. That would be another number. So when we've got it, our quadratic equation set up in this form, the discriminant is found by taking that number b and squaring it, subtracting it by the number 4 times whatever that term a is times whatever that term c is. And when we do this and we get a number, it's going to tell us the number of real solutions. So if we get our number and it's greater than 0, so if we find our discriminant, that number, and it's greater than 0, that means there's going to be 2 real solutions. If when we do the calculations and find that the discriminant is equal to 0, well then we know that there's 1 real solution. And then last but not least, if the discriminant is less than 0, there's no real solutions. So let's try this. Let's say we've got 2x squared minus 3x plus 6. So that's our quadratic equation. We're going to solve it eventually. But before we solve it, we want to know how many solutions we can expect. So we're going to use the quadratic formula, the discriminant, which is this right here. So what's my b term? So remember, this is would be our ax squared plus bx plus c. So which is my b term? What is my b term? So the b term is the number being multiplied by the x. So it's going to be that -3. That negative belongs to that term. So I would say -3 squared, and then I need to do minus 4 times a. What is my a? What's the a term? Well, look up here. The a is the number being multiplied by your x squared, so that would be 2. So then I'm going to have times 2, and then what's my c term? Well, my c term is that constant. The c term is the constant, which is going to be, in this case, 6. So I'm going to say times 6. So let's do the math. -3 squared is the same as saying -3 times -3, which is 9, minus 4 times 2 times 6. Well, what's 4 times 2? 4 times 2 is 8, and what's 8 times 6? So we know this times this is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. So 8 minus 40, I'm sorry, 9 minus 48 gives us -39. So our discriminant is -39. So which category would it fall into? It's less than 0. So -39 is less than 0, so it's going to fall into this category, which means that there would be no real solutions. Since roots really means solutions. Anytime you see roots, that means solutions. 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 So there's not going to be any real solutions to this quadratic equation. And we aren't going to learn in Algebra 1 how to find the non-real roots, so we would stop right there. We wouldn't solve it. I'm going to go on to the next slide, so if you need more time, go ahead and click pause. Otherwise, we're going to move on. All right, so let's practice again. Let's practice again with finding the numbers of solutions in that equation in number 1, x squared plus 2x minus 8. So remember, let's identify the a, b, and c. So a is always, remember, it's always in this term, ax squared plus bx plus c. So a is the coefficient in front of the x squared. In this case, there is not a coefficient, so we know it's 1. We just don't have to write 1x squared. So a would equal 1. What about b? What does b equal? B is the term being multiplied by the x, so it's going to be 2. And then c is going to equal that constant, which is negative 8. So let's plug it in now to find the discriminant using b squared minus 4ac. So b squared, we're going to take 2 and square it, minus 4. We know a is 1, and c is negative 8. So now we're just doing the math. 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times 1 times negative 8. So I know 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 1 is 4, and then 4 times negative 8 is negative 32. So we've got a double negative because we're subtracting. Remember, there's this subtraction sign here, and then minus 32. So what happens when we've got two subtraction signs right next to each other? It becomes a plus. So now we've got 4 plus 32, which is 36. So how many solutions do we have? We've got a discriminant that's a positive number. So if we look back here, that's going to be in this category. If we have a discriminant that's a positive number, that means that we're going to have 2 real number solutions. All right, so I want you to try the second problem in your math notebook so you can get some practice on your own. And then I'm going to do this problem out, but first I want you to click pause and try it on your own. Okay. For number 2, let's first identify the A, the B, and the C. So A, there's no coefficient, so it's A is equal to 1. There's not no coefficient, but if there's not a number in front of it, it means it's a 1. Your coefficient's a 1. B is going to equal 2, and C would equal 1. Now, the discriminant, we find it by taking the B term, squaring it, minus the 4 times AC. So b squared is going to be 2 squared minus 4. The a is 1 and the c is 1. So 4 minus 4 times 1 is 4. What's 4 minus 4? It's 0. How many solutions when our discriminant is equal to 0? 1 real number. So because our discriminant was equal to 0, we know that we've got 1 real number solution. So that discriminant, again, is just to let us know how many solutions that we should expect when we actually solve the quadratic equation. So now your last method that I'm going to show you of how you can solve quadratic equations is the quadratic formula. So take a look at the quadratic formula. It says negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Ah, that should look familiar to you. Everything underneath the square root sign. Look at that. That's the discriminant, isn't it? So we've already practiced that. And then all over 2a. So again, what are all those b's and a's and c? Well, that comes from here when we've got our quadratic equation written in this format. A times x squared plus bx plus c. And let's jump in and let's start using the quadratic formula to solve equations. So first, let's look at that number 1 and determine the number of solutions, and then we're going to solve. Because if we know the number of solutions, it's going to help us know if we did the problem right. So first, let's use the discriminant to help us. So we know a is equal to 1, b is equal to 2, and c equals negative 8. I think we already did this, didn't we? We did this one. We found, yep, there's going to be, so that's that first problem we did up here. So we did that already. We found the discriminant, and we know that there's going to be 2 solutions. There's going to be 2 real number. I forgot to put real in there. 2 solutions. All right, so A is identified, the B and the C, so now we can plug it into the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula tells me that x equals negative b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times 1, which is just 2. So I'm going to leave it as, well, I should put that in there. So now we're going to go through and start cleaning this up. So I'm going to do -2 plus or minus. I'm going to clean up what's underneath the square root sign. And we already did this, right? So we know that the discriminant, we already figured this out. 2 squared is 4, and then 4 minus plus 32, right? Wasn't that what we got? 4 plus 32, yep. 4, 2 squared is 4. 4 times 1 is 4. And then 4 times -8 is -32. So we had that double negative in there. We had that 4 minus the -32. We already did this part, so I'm kind of going quicker for this. So we all underneath our square root sign simplifies down to 36. And then we've got it all over 2 times 1, which is 2. So now if you look, we've got a plus and minus sign. How do we use that? So what we need to do, oh, actually, let's go one step further. What's the square root of 36? We can break that down. The square root of 36 is 6. So now, how do we break down and use that plus and negative sign there? But what we need to do is we need to do one of each. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the equation to say, well, what is it if we have -2 plus 6 divided by 2? Or what do we have when we've got -2 minus 6 divided by 2? What do we get? So those are our two values of x that we can have. So what's -2 plus 6? I'm going to move that over. What's -2? Ooh, I'm missing the 2 on the bottom. -2 plus 6 is 4. And we've got 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So one of our answers is that x can equal 2. Or now we're going to do -2 minus 6. That's where that plus or minus sign comes in. We've got to do it twice. We've got to do the plus version and the minus version. So -2 minus 6 is -8. -8 over 2 is -4. So the other possibility could be x equals -4. So those are our two solutions, and we knew to expect to get two solutions because we found the discriminant. Aha! So that is how we use the quadratic formula. That's how we use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to erase everything that's on the whiteboard right now so that I can do that second problem. So if you need more time here, go ahead and click pause so that you can continue to take notes. Otherwise, I'm going to get rid of everything and it's going to be gone. So go ahead and click pause if you need to now. Or you can click rewind. Don't worry. All right, so we're going to focus on problem 2 now, and I want you to try that in your math notebook. Now remember, we already found the discriminant. We actually found the discriminant of this problem. It was 0, so we know that there's one real solution. So we know to look for one real solution. So we've got one real solution. So go ahead now and use the quadratic formula to help you solve this problem. And then when you're ready to check your work with mine, go ahead and do so. So our A term is going to equal 1 again, our B term is going to equal 2, and our C term will equal 1. So we're going to plug that in now. -b is -2, plus or minus, which we'll address at the end. B squared, so it's going to be 2 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 1, all over 2 times 1. So let's start simplifying what's underneath the square root sign. Let's simplify that first. So 2 squared is 2 minus 4. 4 times 1 times 1, all over 2. So what does that give us? I'm going to go over here. X, oops, that's already not going to put X in there. We've got -2 plus or minus the square root of 0. 4 minus 4 is 0, all over 2. Well, what's the square root of 0? Anything times itself that gives us 0 is 0. So we're really left with now x equals -2 over 2. That's it. We don't have to do the plus or minus. And what's negative 2 divided by 2? That's equal to negative 1. So our final answer is going to be that x equals negative 1. We don't have two solutions. We only have one solution. And that's right. That's what we should expect, is only to have that one solution because we found the discriminant. All right. So that's it. That's all you need to know about quadratic formula. And you're going to get to practice that this week. You're going to get to practice that this week. So let me put up the key phrase assignment. So we learned about how we can find the discriminant of a quadratic equation, which will allow us then to know how many solutions we can expect when we go to solve the quadratic equation. So here, I don't want you to actually solve this quadratic equation. All I want you to do is tell me how many solutions. So you're gonna calculate the discriminant, and the discriminant is going to let you know how many solutions. So you just need to tell me how many solutions will the equation 2x squared plus 4x plus 10 have. And that's it. So remember, I'm always here to help you. If you need any help throughout the week, any questions, let me know. I'm here to help. Have a wonderful rest of your week.